Hi, I'm Stuart and welcome to the channel. Well, we had a lovely hot summer here in the north of England, so much so that it caused drought conditions. But now it seems to have changed and we've got a lot of cold and rainy weather. I'm still hopeful of getting out sometime before Christmas, but for the moment we're stuck in the garage. So my thoughts were starting to turn to what we can do with Rita and our winter projects. Now, one of the issues with Rita is the suspension is very crude and basic, built down to a price. The front forks are 38mm Paiolis, and a lot of trials bikes of the time use them, but these are unadjustable and not able to be changed much at all. Even the spring rate, I can't get a replacement set of springs for it. So if we're going to do anything to it, we're going to need to move to one of the better sets of Paioli 38mm. I say lots of trials bike use them around this period, and most of them had damping control and changeable springs. So I think we'll look for a set of those to graft onto the front of Rita. Once we do that, of course, it's going to show up the Ollie shock at the back as again being very crude and poor quality. So I think we need to upgrade that to a better quality shock to try and match the improvement we're going to make to the front. I think over this winter we'll also have a look at this seat. The cover on it is now cracked and splitting, and it's always been really uncomfortable. So I think while the bike's apart, we'll get this off and send it to a local upholsterer for a new cover and maybe some different quality foam underneath there. Right, these are the forks that we're going to be using. They're 38mm Paiolis, but they're a lot later, and crucially they have damping adjustment on them. So I'm hoping that these will be a little bit of an upgrade for what Rita's already got. Now, a couple of issues with using these. First is that the mounts for the brake calipers are on the front, not on the rear, so that's not going to work with our existing brakes. And secondly, the axle is a much larger size than the current one on the Beta Alp. So what we're going to have to do is actually replace the whole front end with an entire Sherco. These came off a Sherco 2006, so I'm going to get a brake caliper and a wheel and just replace the whole lot. Now they look to be in pretty good condition, but I'm going to take them apart anyway because I'd just like to make sure they're clean inside and put new seals in. Now to take them apart, there's a screw that goes in the bottom here, and normally we'd have to get inside and lock the fork from turning, but I'm hoping that an impact wrench we might be able to take those off without actually dismantling the fork. What we'll do is we'll use the tension of the springs inside to actually hold the fork while the impact driver loosens that. See if it works. Right, cover your ears. Success. Success. Now if this hadn't have worked, what we need is a socket that's been cut, a 19mm socket that's been cut with a slot. And then we reach it down inside and there's a fastener inside here that we can then connect to undo it, but that seems to have worked perfectly. Right, having taken out the screws, if we now tip them upside down, all the oil comes out. So I've got a tray down here, don't worry. So we're going to stand them in there and just let the oil drain. I suppose the good news is that they did have oil in them. Right, back in a minute. That's got most of the oil out of it. I'm just going to put that paper in there just to stop my workbench getting filthy. So we're going to start off with the right leg, which is the damping side. It doesn't have the main spring in it, so it shouldn't be under as much tension. Let's see if we can just get a reasonable grip on the fork leg. And 19mm. That's nice and easy. I worry that wasn't too tight. And there we have everything out. See now why I put the paper down. Lovely. Now before we start trying to clean everything up, there's one more bit to disassemble here. Inside this tube, there's a needle that goes down and it adjusts the damping. So we need to take that out. Am I tightening this the wrong way? There we go. Bit of brute force is all that's needed. So we back off this lock nut here, and then the cap screws off. That's a long thread. Okay. I was expecting the needle to come out with it there, but it hasn't. Right. Let's get some needle pliers. Medical forceps, that should do the job. No. Right, I'll have to think about how this comes out. Find me the manual. Right, according to the book, there's a needle in here, and then there's a small piece that goes on top of it, which has an O-ring. And I can't for the life of me get that out. The O-ring seems to be stuck. So we'll leave that to think about for a while. We'll take out the seals and the tubes. So thankfully, as I don't need these, I don't have to be too careful with them. We'll start by levering off the dust cap. There we go. Now in theory, we can use the tube like a hammer and pop out the seal, but first there's a now this is a first. That's the locating clip, and that looks absolutely brand new. I've never seen one that isn't rusted to hell. Very nice. Right, let's see what we can do with this. There we go. All done. So we'll slide off the seal. Again, I'll replace that, but it's in remarkably good condition. And then some sort of spacer. And then this is the bushing. Now we need to check the inside surface of this to see if it's worn away. It looks to be a nice dull finish all around. No polishing on it. I think that looks alright as well. These forks are in remarkably good condition. Yep, no wiggling that. Very good. Now we're just going to push some paper through the middle of here just to clean out any grit there might be. Need a stick. Right, so you can push this all the way through. Where's it gone? There's it. Let's have a look at it with the light at the end. Yeah, nice and clean. And again, we'll just give this a tissue down the tube and push it back out. Yep, looks nice and clean. Well, I've tried everything. All my needle nose pliers. I've filed the ends down to try and get them in there, and there's just not enough room to get in. I've even used medical forceps and nothing's getting it out. So I'd love to strip this down and examine everything, but I think we're going to have to clean it as is. Just give it a thorough rinse out and see how we go from there. Right, let's get some cleaning fluid on it. Well, not much muck in there. Remarkably clean. It's hardly even dirtied the spirits. Right, dry that off and start reassembly. So if anyone knows the secret of getting that little needle valve out of there on a set of 38mm Paiolis, please let us know in the comments, because I would love to know. Right, it's ready to go. Right, before we start on the assembly, we're going to make a couple of basic checks to see the condition of the forks. So we're going to start off with a nice flat edge one. and we're going to check if there's any bend in the tube. That looks good. Try it at 2 or 3 different places. Yeah, that's nice and straight. Now the next thing we're going to check is the fit of the bushes. So I've got my 38mm bushing seater. A piece of drain pipe will do just as well, but this is made for the job. So I'm going to start by just slotting the tube together with just the bushes. And we've knocked the top bush in. There we go. Then we're going to check for any play. Yeah, there is a slight rattle there. So although those bushes look alright, either the bush is worn or the slider itself is worn. I think the top one's good and tight, but the one on the fork tube is worn. So I'm pre-prepared with some bushes, so let's give that a change and see if it makes a difference. So the bottom bush is this metal ring on the end of the fork tube, and it's split, so if we just prise it open it will slide off like that. Reverse for the new one. That's a good tight fit. Right, let's try that test again. Place that in. Knock the top bush in. And try that test again. Yeah, still a slight amount of movement there. It's actually worse at the point where the forks normally rest. Right, it seems even with the new bushes in, this slider here has got too much play in it. So we're going to try an old-fashioned bodge rather than throw the whole set of forks away. Small piece of electrical tape. I'm going to just pop that into the groove at the bottom of the fork leg. And hopefully that'll just expand the bush enough to make it a tight fit. Let's see what we've got. That's certainly a tighter fit. There we go. Pop our top bush in. Let's try again. That's perfect. Moving freely. Once it gets outside the wear zone, it does get a little tight. I might just reduce that piece of tape a little bit. It's just a little too tight outside that main wear area. But that looks like it might be recoverable. Right, I've literally just put 3/4 of an inch of tape underneath that bush. And there's still a very tiny amount of rocking right at its main wear area. But other than that, I think that's close enough. And it still moves. It's a little tight in the other areas, but with a bit more grease, a bit more oil, it should move well. Good. Right, so the next job is to put the damping mechanism back inside the fork. Before I tighten that down, I'm just going to re-anneal this little copper washer, make sure it's soft enough. The way we do that is by heating it up. So we've got that to copper to dull red. Just let it cool down now and it's ready to go. Right, so we're going to insert the damper mechanism into the tube, seat it all the way to the bottom, get our newly tempered copper washer and some Loctite 243, which is the non-rigid, soft, removable. Just a tiny touch around the end. And just tighten it all up. All done. Right, the next job is to put back the new oil seal and the new dust cap. So before we start, we're going to put some oil around the top and down the fork leg, just to make sure that the seal doesn't grip too much and tear. So the first thing we have is a spacer. And then we have our oil seal. Again, we'll put some oil around the inside lip. Make sure it's going to move nice and smoothly. Very gently ease it over the top. There we go. Now we have to seat it down into there. So again, we've got our seal driver, and we're going to knock it down into there. Once it's gone down far enough, we can see the groove that this clip sits in. We can put that back on. Just feed that down until it clicks into place. And make sure that ring is seated into the groove. Final job, a little bit more oil again for our dust seal. That slides into the top. Then we need the driver again. That's it. Make sure it's seated all the way down. Check we've got nice free movement, which we do. Very good. Right, next job is to put some fork oil into the fork. Various places give you measurements for this. There seems to be some disagreement on these forks. So I'm actually going with a place called the Splat Shop, who sell trials equipment, and they recommend 370 cc's in the right leg, but more importantly is the air gap, a 60mm air gap. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off, we're using 5 weight oil because that's what's recommended. I'd normally use 2.5 weight, but let's see how we get on with this. So we're going to use 5 weight. I'm going to measure out roughly 350 cc's and then do the final measurements, measuring the air gap. Right, so I measured out 350 cc's. So I'm going to carefully pour it into here. This is with the fork tube at its bottom. We're going to work the damper. Make sure we get that oil all the way into the mechanism. Right, no sound of air bubbles anymore. So now we're going to measure our air gap. So if you're lucky and you have a pair of calipers, one end of that is actually a depth measure. So as you open them, this piece comes out here. So I'm wanting a depth of 60mm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it to 70, so I can then have 10mm of depth on the end of it. So now all we have to do is dip it down inside the forks. Forks fully compressed, and measure how deep it is. I'll keep on with this until I get it right. So the recommendation from Splat Shop was 370 cc's but a 60mm air gap. So I've been putting oil in there and I've been using my probe. I've set my probe at 70mm depth, but then I've drawn a line on the end of it 10mm from the end. So when the oil in the forks gets up to that line, I know it's set at 60mm deep. So put the caliper so it sits on the edge of the fork tube, and then check the oil as it comes out. Yeah, I can see that is right on the line that I drew, so I know that's 60mm air gap. Right, the final job is to put the fork cap on. So to start this process off, I've actually backed off the adjuster right out, so it's not putting any pressure on the end of the fork. Then we screw this onto the end of the damper rod. Until that's down as far as it will go. Yep. And then we tighten up the lock nut. I've got my 14mm spanner for the lock nut, my 19 for the top cap, get that good and tight. Then we allow the cap to go back into the fork tube and tighten it in. Nice and easy because there's no spring this side. Now check the O-ring at the top was in good condition, so we're reusing that. So we tighten it until the O-ring is seated right into the fork. This is where putting oil on the forks hasn't helped. That's it. The right leg is good to go. And it's got some movement on it. and no wobble at all. So that's good. We'll move on to the next leg. So I hope you enjoyed watching, and that's all from me. Until the next time.